delegates. It's my pleasure to be here at the Australian BIC Conference. As you can see, I'm from the island to the east of Australia. In comparison, our population is 4.5 million compared to Singapore's 5.5 million. So yeah, quite a different scale. Just a little bit of context. Over the next 3 years, we're investing almost $2 billion in public transport services and infrastructure, and that's both mainly central government, but also local government share, and that's the largest amount that has ever been invested in public transport. So some good news there. We have about 144 million passenger trips per year, and that's been growing probably about 5% on average. So what I'm going to tell you about, and then we've had some context, is some exciting research that builds on the work that Michael talked about the trends in Generation Y and what we are looking for in future customers. So New Zealand Transport Agency actually commissions quite a lot of research, and this is all publicly available on our website. So if you're interested in this or any other public transport research, feel free to go and have a look. The web address is at the end of the presentation. We commissioned Opus Research to answer the question, were the trends that were occurring overseas actually occurring in New Zealand? So in terms of who is the next generation, and why should we consider them important for public transport? And then how should we use that in planning our public transport services and infrastructure in the future? So who is Generation Y? There's lots of different definitions, and often referred to as millennials, and then we have coming through the next generation, which is my children. For purposes of our research, we took them to be 15 to 35 years of age in 2014. So that was born between 1979 and 1999. And also helped that it fitted with our census definitions. So why are they important for public transport? As you can see, this is a graph of our regional proportions of Generation Y. As you can see, it's quite uneven across the regions. We have a large population, over 30% of the population, Auckland, which is also our largest public transport market and the fastest growing city in New Zealand. Wellington is a stable public transport market, but it also has over 30% of Generation Y as part of our customers. And the other area is Otago, which includes the fast-growing tourist area of Queenstown. 3 other areas in the regional sense also included university towns, and they have almost a quarter of their population Generation Y. So in different areas of the country, Generation Y is a significant customer base. So why Generation Y, and why are they different to the rest of us? So Generation Y generally connect to others through technology. Having one of these things, and the latest one of these things, is much more important than a car. They travel less, they use public transport more, and getting their driver's licence later is not such an important aspect of their life. Generation X and baby boomers, the older ones of us, we value face-to-face interaction more, we do travel more, we use public transport less on the whole, and we got our driver's licence much sooner. It was a priority. So our research approach, we looked at international trends and looked at aspects of that, and then we saw what were these changes in the New Zealand context, what was actually happening. We also had focus groups not only in the major cities, but also in some of the provincial towns where we wondered whether these trends were showing or not showing there. And then we undertook an online survey, connections through Facebook and sites like the Automobile Association and our public transport blog in Auckland, which is really popular, and through Generation Zero too. And we also had a control group of the older population just to compare behaviours. So in terms of our research findings, confirmed overseas trends were very evident in New Zealand. There was definitely less travel, especially recreational travel. Lower driver licence rates were being observed, and there was a decline quite significantly in vehicle kilometres driven. There was reduced vehicle ownership by this group, and public transport as well as cycling was increasing. But the majority of travel by light vehicle still exists, for majority, and particularly in some of those provincial centres. We asked what would attract people, Generation Y, to public transport, and interestingly, more than 80% of people offered up a reason why they would use public transport. This was much more evident than the older generations. Number one was avoid finding or paying for parking, absolutely hated that. More environmentally friendly travel mode, people were quite keen to be demonstrating the use of that. And the ability to do other things, like play on their phones, while they were travelling was another attractor. In terms of the most common barriers, it was time taken to travel via public transport, infrequent services, lack of coverage, and the expense. So, good news for PT, there's evidence of high latent demand for this group, for public transport and for active modes, and certainly looking out over 5 years. Public transport is being seen as a more viable option. Generation Y currently use and will continue to use public transport at a higher rate than older New Zealanders. Half of Generation Y are predicted to use public transport for both their main and other trips if service is improved. The biggest increase is definitely in the other trips for recreational and social purposes, rather than just journeys to work, journeys to education. There's potential for public transport service improvement priorities too, so if we target what Generation Y want, it will certainly help improve the quality of service being provided for everyone and actually have knock-on effects. Public transport potential use. Generation Y predicted that they would increase public transport use in the next 5 years. Certainly for main trips, they were looking, if the services were available, to almost go to half of their trips being used on public transport from a base of 35%. Main trips, with travels to work and education, could, with improvements, could go up to 54% use if they were getting the responses that they wanted. Other trips, particularly recreational, would have an even bigger increase, and with improvements could go to almost 49% from just a 19% base. The control group, the Generation X and baby boomers, had a lower base with smaller increases, but definitely we're looking for main trips to improve to even 34%. So there's actually demand there, and if we can keep meeting what the customer wants and providing those frequency of services, there's good potential. This table just shows the top 10 service priorities. Obviously wanting more public transport, improved frequency and coverage, and faster. Bus priority was number 3, having bus priority lanes. Looking at free transfers, the ease of ticketing, including integrated ticketing, and real-time information and Wi-Fi on services. And that's just compared with the control group on the right. Convenience is the most important predictor of transport mode. Affordability and safety were also important. Certain life stages, though, were associated with a decrease in public transport. So things like having children, moving out of the family home. Generations Y still value being able to drive and the independence that brings, so public transport almost needs to replicate this. And convenience overall is the main motivator for for transport mode choices. Interestingly, active transport infrastructure, particularly for in the smaller centres, was really valued and something that has probably been neglected quite a lot in transport investment decisions. So Generation Y's travel was more likely to vary over time. Life phases, as I mentioned, moving locations, changing jobs, starting a family, moving overseas for an overseas experience, moving out of the family home can actually make a big difference to transport expectations and the modes that be used. So in terms of an overview, there's evidence of high latent demand for public and active transport among Generation Y and actually older New Zealanders over the next 5 years. Generation Y currently use and are projected to continue use of public transport at higher rates than older New Zealanders. Half of Generation Y predicted to be using PT for both their main and other trips as services improve. This is a really positive outcome for public transport, and it's our challenge to actually meet their expectations. Generation Y are highly transitional in their travel behaviour, 90% actually expected that to change over the next 5 years or so. So we need to be adept and able to change services and be flexible to meet expectations. A lot of overlap in service improvement priorities. So by actually looking at what Generation Y want, we will actually help grow public transport and meet needs of other users. So in terms of how we're using this research, the top 7 priorities across Generation Y and older New Zealanders should be targeted for future investment. Evidence suggests that if investment is made in public transport and active transport infrastructure, increased usage will result. The findings should inform planning and investment decisions, and certainly are feeding into what we have as regional land transport plans, so 6-year horizon, and our National Land Transport Program, which is a 3-year investment platform. So if you want to check out this research, it is, as I mentioned, available, and along with a whole lot of other public transport research, it's freely available on our website. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Michelle before she runs away? Michael Rocheleau, just down the front here. Right down the front. Al? So how about those All Blacks?
They're pretty good.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. I'm curious as to whether your research was able to probe into the level of sensitivity that Gen Ys have to service frequency and reliability. Because as much as I agree totally with the predilection that Gen Y has to using public transport, I also get the sense that they're very impatient, and that if the service isn't there within 5 minutes, they'll go some other way.
Yep, totally agree. And that was in terms of saying what they want in future and being responsive and meeting that. And if, as you say, a bad experience, they'll turn away for it just as quickly. Yeah, and the likes of Uber and other adaptive technologies will fill that space.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you coming across the ditch.